You are listening to a podcast series, Asking Soulful Questions, by Sacred Art of Living. To learn more, visit sacredartofliving.org. Today's podcast is a part of a series called The Question of Belief.
All right. Well, we're back with Dara Molloy. In this next space of time, I'd like to learn a little bit more about the Celtic traditions and how that influences your belief system and what you believe we can learn from that tradition.
Oh, well, I myself have learned so much, and I'm continuing to learn as I live my life. And what I find about the Celtic spiritual tradition is possibly true of many other spiritual traditions that we're not familiar with. I'm not talking about mainstream religions now. I'm talking about more indigenous traditions. But it's certainly true in the Celtic tradition that it's not based on a creed. So you don't have to subscribe to a set of beliefs. It's not prescriptive either. There's no 10 commandments. There's not even one commandment. That's not what it's about. What it is about is living in the presence of something sacred. John O'Donoghue calls it living in the presence of wonder. So you can put your own words onto it, but it's living constantly with a sense that you're surrounded by something magical, something mysterious, something wondrous. I mean, we get born into a world which is that, and we find it in many children that they have that sense of wonder, but often they lose it then as they grow up. Whereas if you begin to tune yourself back in, you can see the wonder in just so much around you on this planet in which we live. And the Celtic tradition teaches you how to do that. In the ancient tradition before Christianity came to Ireland, and this Celtic tradition is unique in that it absorbed Christianity, or Christianity absorbed it, whichever way you want to put it. So it has a Christian dimension to it as well as a pagan dimension to it. But in the pagan dimension, there's a whole gathering of gods and goddesses. And my interpretation of it is that these were imaginative ways of putting a face and a name on the various ways one can experience the divine. And it's the big pictures. So you can experience the divine in the sea. That's a big picture, you know. You can experience the divine in the sun. You can experience the divine in the seasons. You can experience the divine in a particular river. And in the land itself, of course. So these people had an oral culture, so they weren't writing anything down. So they had to find ways to paint pictures that could easily be transmitted to the next generation. So they put names and faces on all these gods and goddesses. But there was like an infinite number of them, or an undefined number of them. So in the course of your life, you might want to relate to one more than another because of where you live or because of the situation at the time. So I think that's how they worked. But in all of this, they located the presence of these divine beings within their natural environment. So if you went to the seaside, you experienced not just the material nature of the sea, the water, and so on, but you also experience the spiritual nature of the sea, who was given the name of a god. In this case, there's a male god. In fact, there are a number of male gods associated with the sea. Similarly with the sun, similarly with the rivers, although the rivers are mostly female, the land, the divine presence associated with the land was mostly female, and so on. It's just a vocabulary to help you talk about that experience you're having of the divine in whatever part of nature you're in at the time. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could develop our own vocabulary today to do that again? It doesn't have to be the ancient gods and goddesses of the Celts. It can be whatever way we want to do it, but it obviously has to work. It has to be something that we can then relate to and talk about and pass on to our next generation, to our children. But I think that's what Celtic spirituality has to offer. that vocabulary of naming our experience of the divine in nature in all its various forms.
That's beautiful. We have a woman in Scotland who's been a teacher to our students in our Anam Cara apprenticeship program. And she always begins, she takes us through the Celtic year, the turning of the wheel of nature. And she starts off by saying, imagine that you have the scripture of nature and that the 4 seasons are the 4 gospels. And of course, she says, before there was any written Bible, that's what there was. That's what creation is. And you can watch those out your window or on the calendar, but you can also begin to see the association between the inner seasons of our life and the outer seasons of nature. And I think it's that invitation that starts to help people be much more fascinated in the mystery of the changing of nature as a starting point.
Yeah, like I'm now in my 70s, and I'm very grateful that I've lived long enough to get to the point where I'm not taking things for granted the way I used to. Like, one of the insights that I'm sort of chewing on at the moment, or getting a lot of nourishment from at the moment and thinking about it a lot, is that, we're coming into spring here. We've had a fairly mild winter, but the trees were bare. There's no birds nesting. There's no flowers. The grass wasn't growing. And now spring has come. And now I need to get out and cut the grass. Our potatoes, which we harvested last year, are sprouting in their boxes. We need to get them out into the ground. What's causing me fascination is that every living thing possibly on this planet is aware of the changing seasons. And like, all the birds are sort of frantically busy these days, because I can see them flying hither and thither. And every evening, where I've just been out for a walk now this evening, they're all singing away, trying to establish their own particular areas where they're going to build their nest and rear their young, and they want to get the others out of the way. And every living thing is aware of the coming of spring. And probably we're the only exception. No, we're aware too, aren't we? We're aware too. So, but I think we just need to become aware that, this is something that's part of all of nature. It's not just me that's delighted that the spring is coming. It's all of nature's delighted that the spring is coming. And that's if we get into that groove, then we begin to appreciate that we're all in this together. We get this connectedness that you're talking about, Darrell.
Yeah, well, and it leads me right into what I was thinking. The disconnection. You made me think about when I was in my 40s. I was living in Portland, Oregon, which is a large city, and had gone there out of school because I wanted to make my way, right? Make my fortune, whatever it was. But I grew up in the country, and so we spent a lot of time backpacking. So it was easy to get out of town quickly and hike. And every time on a Sunday, the whole gang you'd see this kind of depression set in. Is like, oh man, we got to go back to the city. How do we, and we lose it. I finally one time I said, why do I keep doing that? And that's what led me to move back to Bend and on the 40 acres I grew up on. But it was that I'm trying to sit here and think about what would be advice in the situation we find ourselves in, where so many people live in really large cities. How do they get a chance to reconnect with that? Because I think you're right. I think it's so valuable. You cannot be in nature and not feel different.
Yeah. Well, I suppose everybody has to find their own way. I have plenty of friends living in cities, and I know they have a number of ways of trying to deal with this issue that you're talking about. I mean, one of the ways, of course, is you can have potted plants all around your house. Even if you live in a small apartment, you can have living things with you. Also, I know many people have dogs and cats and other types of pets, and that there are ways of connecting with other forms of nature. And in every city, there's a river, probably. There are trees. There are open green spaces. So all of those can be used. I mean, maybe like most people, I spend a lot of time in my office. I spend a lot of time on the computer, on the laptop. So I'm no different from city people in that way.
Right.
I can just down tools every now and again and get out into the country. But if you're in a city and there's a green space near you, you can do the same, So that's what I'd be saying to people. And then I know that some people have places that are sort of sacred to them, and they go there when they need to be renewed or revived or whatever. So, like the Aran Islands is a place for so many people who can't live here, but they come here maybe once or twice or even more a year because it revives them, it nourishes them, it strengthens them to get back to what they have to do. So that's another way to do it, is just have a little escape place where you can go and be renewed and revived out in the countryside somewhere, wherever that might be for you.
Yeah. That seems to be such a at the bottom of it all, when there's so much being written today about a sort of renaissance around Celtic wisdom, spirituality, experience. And this nature seems to be the taproot of it. I'm also thinking of something you said earlier. One of our mentors in our Anam Cara program is John Moriarty. He's kind of a brilliant writer, philosopher. And we've played clips of John, he's passed on, talking about the sickness, the mammon illness of Western culture. And he says, if we laid Western culture down on the psychotherapist's couch, we would find that the origin of the disease, which manifests in our planet, is a belief in a biblical mandate to, in Genesis, have the mandate you think you heard to have dominion over nature and not to let nature be a teacher, not even to be an equal partner. And that misinterpretation has in some ways set us off on a path that is very frightening and potentially destructive.
Yeah, and that links in with the way I think about now our traditional belief in a God in heaven. That when I was being trained to be a priest, the whole idea was not my will but thine be done, and God was to be something that we all were to emulate, and the more holy you became, the more like God you became. So when you think about that, it means that you're moving yourself off this earth. And that was another thing we learned in seminary, was to be in this world, but not of this world. That was a famous phrase that we were all taught. So again, it's that idea that the true perspective is the perspective that God the Father has in heaven. And therefore, our goal is to look at the earth from his perspective and to practice that again and again. If you do that, you don't belong to this earth. You're not part of this earth. You're not directly connected to anything else on this earth. And you can simply, as you said, you can have dominion over this earth. So it is definitely a sickness, but it's connected to the dominance of the monotheist belief. And that's something, that only gradually came to me as an insight. I don't think there's any problem if one person or 10 people or a small group of people decide that that's what they want to believe. It's when more than half the world's population believes it that you've got a problem. In my book, I say it's like all the people moving over to one side of the ferry that takes us out here to the island. It's a 300-seater ferry. And if some dolphins manage to appear on one side of the boat, which they sometimes do, and we all rush to one side to see the dolphins, the boat might overturn. But that's the way most of us are living on this earth. That most of us believe in this one God in heaven, this monotheist God in heaven, whether we're Christians or Muslims or Jews, and there's a few other religions as well that believe in the God of Moses. So that's tipping the boat over to one side. Whereas if just a few of us believed it like the Jews originally did, in a world which is surrounded, the Jews at the time were surrounded by people who believed lots of other things. So that was fine. There was diversity there. The problem is there's no diversity there now. And that's tipping the boat over.
It's interesting when you say that, because I, in my own practice and belief system, do see value in thy will being done. But the way I frame that is, what I'm trying to do when I say something like that is take my ego out of the process and look for that super consciousness, whatever, that whatever source, presence, whatever, to allow that to guide me, rather than this individualized sack that I call Daryl as a way of being connected.
Yeah, well, I totally subscribe to that. I think I've sent it to you, Richard, there recently. A friend of mine asked me to try to rewrite the Our Father as a Celtic version, and one of the lines that I put into it was, "May we." I can't get there, or I haven't got it.
Can you share the whole thing with us?
I'll have to find it. Maybe I can in a second. But
okay.
Are we going to stop again? Because I could find it that way.
We could, yeah.
Okay. Well, one of the lines in it is that we may find our true calling and be able to recognize false callings from the true callings. That's another way of saying what you're saying, Darrell, I think. It's to get down to the very root of who we are and who we're meant to be, and to try to be that person as best we can, even if we don't understand why. Like, so many of the geniuses of this world, I'm very interested in some of their biographies at the moment, and quite a number of them made huge contribution to humanity, but that contribution wasn't appreciated in their lifetime. Like J.S. Bach is the one I'm reading about at the moment, and J.S. Bach was appreciated for his ability to play the organ, but he wasn't appreciated till about 100 years after his death for all the music that he had written, which is what we so much enjoy nowadays. And the same can be true of so many others. James Joyce, who wrote Ulysses, all these people appreciated now long after their death. And so, I may not know the fruits of the work that I have to do, but I don't have to know, because I simply have to live my calling to the very best of my ability and try to separate false callings from the true calling. That's my job.
Wonderful. Jerry, maybe you can wrap this one up then.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up this portion of our discussion, because I really look forward to coming back and giving Dara a chance to find his reinterpretation and sharing that with us. I think everybody would really enjoy that. So please stay tuned, and we'll come back with more of this discussion.
We would like to thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Question of Belief. For more information about our entire podcast library, Asking Soulful Questions, visit our website at sacredartofliving.org.